criticized Iran's response to Washington's
Unbelievably.
There is a country most people have a strong opinion about, despite never setting foot inside it. The images you've seen, protests, burning flags, polished news segments, are real. But they're not the whole picture. Not even close. What if I told you that behind all of that exists a place so ancient, so layered, so quietly extraordinary, that nearly everyone who visits leaves saying the same thing? I had no idea. This is the Iran you don't see, the one beyond headlines and politics. And by the end of this, you'll understand something that most people never get the chance to understand. Why this country, more than almost any other on earth, refuses to be what you expect it to be. Most countries count their history in centuries. Iran counts in millennia, and you can feel it. This isn't only a place built on history, it's built through it. The past isn't behind you here, it's under your feet, in the walls, in the language, still breathing. Before Rome was Rome, before Athens had philosophers, before the pyramids were even fully understood, Persia was already old, already complex, already debating poetry, mathematics, and the nature of existence. But here's the part people rarely stop to consider. What does that do to a culture? What does it feel like to carry 7,000 years of identity? To walk through a city knowing entire empires lie beneath you, and that they're yours. There's a word in Farsi, ta'aruf. It doesn't translate cleanly. It's a system of ritual politeness, offering what you don't expect to give, refusing what you quietly want. An intricate dance designed to protect dignity above all else. To outsiders, it feels confusing, even contradictory. To Iranians, it's essential. And that gap, that small moment of misunderstanding, reveals something bigger. Iran is not a place that's hard to understand because it's hiding something. It's hard to understand because it operates on a frequency that most of the modern world has forgotten how to hear. Ancient, layered, proud in a way that doesn't ask for your permission. By any rational standard, this is a place that should grind to a halt. 14 million people pressing into a restless sprawl. Traffic so relentless it makes gridlock elsewhere feel almost quaint. Air that on its worst days swallows entire mountain ranges whole, erasing even peaks that scrape 18,000 feet into the sky. Every signal points to collapse, to exhaustion, to a city overwhelmed by its own scale. And yet, it pulses forward, defiant. It hums with a kind of raw kinetic energy that refuses to be dulled or diminished. This is not just survival. It's intensity, unpredictability, life at full voltage. This is Tehran. There is a version of Tehran that exists in the international imagination. austere, dangerous, oppressive. And there are elements of that version that are grounded in real policy, real restriction, real consequence. That is not nothing, but that's not invented. But walk into a Tehran apartment on a Thursday night, the beginning of the Iranian weekend, and what you find will rearrange something in your understanding of the word contradiction. You'll find music, you'll find dancing, you'll find men and women together laughing, drinking things that are technically illegal, talking about Rumi and Radiohead and the latest Netflix series in the same breath. The public face of Tehran and the private face of Tehran are two different cities, and Iranians navigate between them with a fluency that's genuinely breathtaking to witness. There's a concept that sociologists sometimes call the private transcript, the hidden script that people living under restriction develop to preserve their authentic selves. In Tehran, this private transcript is not a whisper. It's a roar. It's one of the most sophisticated, creative, quietly defiant acts of cultural self-preservation happening anywhere on Earth right now. And almost no one outside the country knows it exists. Step off the road for 5 minutes, just 5, and the world begins to feel hostile to your existence. Heat presses in from every direction, the horizon flickers, and the ground itself radiates a kind of quiet violence. Out here, survival isn't assumed, it's negotiated. If Tehran is the country's heartbeat, this is something deeper, older, something closer to its core. The interior deserts are not just empty expanses, they are extremes made real. In places like the Dasht-e-Kavir and the Dasht-e-Lut, the earth reaches temperatures that defy intuition, over 70 degrees Celsius, hot enough to make the air itself feel unstable. Life doesn't thrive here, it barely holds on. And yet, people who've crossed these landscapes don't describe them as harsh. They describe them as unforgettable, even beautiful in a way that's difficult to explain until you've stood inside that silence. But here's where the story shifts, because these deserts are not empty, not in the way we usually mean. Beneath the surface, out of sight, runs a network that shouldn't exist. Thousands of years ago, Persian engineers carved qanats, underground channels that carry water from distant mountains, across vast, arid distances, delivering it to settlements that logic says should never have been built here in the first place. And the strangest part? Some of these systems are still working, right now, still moving water without pumps, without modern machinery, guided only by gravity and calculations made over 3 millennia ago. Even today, engineers study them and struggle to fully understand how their builders achieve such precision across such distances. So sit with that. In one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, a solution was created so durable, so exact, that it continues to sustain life thousands of years later. That's not just ingenuity, it's a mindset, a way of thinking that doesn't just solve problems for today, but reaches forward across centuries and refuses to let go. Here's something that will sound strange if you haven't been to Iran, and will sound completely obvious if you have. Poetry is not a hobby in this country. It's not something you study in school and then forget. Poetry in Iran is infrastructure. It's load-bearing. They're quoted in taxis, in text messages at dinner tables woven so tightly into everyday speech that you might not even realize you're hearing poetry at all. These figures aren't treated like distant literary icons the way William Shakespeare often is elsewhere. They move through daily life, embedded in how people think, speak, and understand the world around them. Iranians use poetry the way other cultures use proverbs, the way some cultures use scripture. When something important happens, a birth, a death, a loss, a love, a political crisis, the instinct is to reach for a verse, not to explain the feeling, to contain it. There's a practice called fal-e-hafez, the divination of Hafez. You hold the collected poems of Hafez, you close your eyes, you think of your question, and you open to a random page. The verse you find is your answer, your guidance, your truth. It doesn't matter, because it's not really about mysticism. It's about the belief, the deeply held, culturally embedded belief that the right words, arranged in the right order, can tell you something true about the world. What does it do to a society when its highest art form is also its most practical one? It creates people who are, in a very specific and measurable way, harder to reduce, harder to flatten into a headline, harder to make into a simple story. By now, you might be thinking, okay, I understand. Iran is more complex than I thought. I get it. Stop. Because what I'm about to tell you is the part that most people miss. A part that even people who visit Iran sometimes miss, because it requires sitting with something deeply uncomfortable. Iran is not just a place that contains contradictions. Iran is a place that has learned to use contradiction as a survival mechanism. Think about what this country has survived in the last 100 years alone. The revolution of 1906, a British and Soviet occupation during World War II, a CIA-backed coup, a revolution in 1979, an 8-year war with Iraq, one of the longest and most brutal conventional wars of the 20th century. And through all of it, through every single one of these catastrophic disruptions, Iranian culture did not disappear. It did not dissolve. It bent. It adapted. It found ways to carry itself forward that were sometimes beautiful, sometimes painful, and sometimes both at the same time. The paradox is not a flaw in Iran's character. The paradox is the character. The ability to hold two completely opposite truths simultaneously. That is not confusion. That's sophistication of the highest order. There's a woman I want to tell you about. Her name is not important for this story. What's important is what she does every morning before the city wakes up. She's a mathematics professor. She speaks 4 languages. She reads Hafez before she sleeps and listens to jazz while she grades papers. She's not an exception. She is, in the most straightforward sense of the word, ordinary. Ordinary in Iran. The Iran that exists in most people's imagination has no room for her. The mental model is too simple. And here is what makes this genuinely urgent. The gap between the Iran that exists in the imagination and the Iran that actually exists is not just an intellectual problem. It's a practical one. Every country contains multitudes, but some countries are more aggressively flattened by the outside gaze than others. And Iran, for reasons that are partly political, partly historical, and partly just the brutal economics of how international media works, is one of the most aggressively flattened places on Earth, because decisions get made based on that gap. Policies get written, and the people inside the gap, they become invisible, become abstract, become easier to ignore. Every country contains multitudes, but some countries are more aggressively flattened by the outside gaze than others. And Iran, for reasons that are partly political, partly historical, partly just the brutal economics of how international media works, is one of the most aggressively flattened places on Earth. Seeing it clearly is not a political act. It's not a statement of approval or disapproval. It's simply the harder, more honest, more human thing to do. Here's the question I've been building toward this entire time, and it's not a comfortable one. Why don't we know that? Why does the gap exist? And, more importantly, what does the existence of that gap tell us about ourselves? It tells us that we're, most of us, operating on a map that was drawn by someone else. It tells us that the human brain, when confronted with complexity, hasn't been given the tools to process. It defaults to simplicity, the story it already knows, to the image it's already seen. Not because we're lazy, not because we're cruel, but because complexity is genuinely hard work, and the world produces more of it every day than any of us can keep up with. Iran is a civilization that spent 7,000 years refusing to be simple, refusing to be conquered, refusing to be erased. And it's now being erased in a different way. Not by armies, but by abstraction. The people of Iran have a word for this too, girat. It translates, roughly, as a fierce sense of honor and pride, a refusal to be diminished. Watching it be simultaneously sanctioned and celebrated, condemned and studied, you begin to understand why that word had to exist, why a culture that's been misread this consistently needed a word for the specific feeling of refusing to accept someone else's diminished version of you. There's a moment that almost everyone who travels to Iran describes. It happens at different times, but it happens. It's the moment when the map in their head, the map drawn by someone else, stops being the map they're using. And here's what makes that moment so genuinely unsettling. It's not that Iran turns out to be perfect. The political realities do not vanish. What changes is something more fundamental. What changes is the understanding that a place, any place, cannot be known from the outside. Iran looked back at me through the tilework of a mosque in Isfahan, where the geometry was so precise, so impossibly intricate, that it took my breath away. It was proof that a human mind 500 years ago had sat down and solved a problem of such complexity that I couldn't fully comprehend the solution, only stand inside it and feel it working. This is what Iran does to you if you let it. It makes you feel the weight of what you don't know. And that feeling, that specific, humbling, quietly magnificent feeling, is the beginning of actually understanding anything at all. Iran is not waiting for your understanding. It's been here for 7,000 years, and it will be here long after the current cycle of headlines has been forgotten. But the understanding, if you choose to reach for it, will change you. Because the act of seeing a place clearly, in its full complexity, in its full humanity, is one of the few things that can genuinely expand the size of the world you live in. And a bigger world is a better world to live in, always.